Open your fridge. Seriously, check what's inside. Now imagine this. This is all the food you have for you and your family for the next 30 days. That's it. You can't go to a supermarket tomorrow. There is no Swiggy, no Zomato, no grocery delivery. Whatever is inside this fridge has to last the next 30 days. Now imagine you are responsible for thousands of people: soldiers, farmers, workers, children, and every single one of them needs to eat. So, what would you do? Now imagine this isn't your fridge, it's your kingdom's food supply, and you are the king or the queen. You have thousands of people depending on you, and you have enough food for just 30 days. But here's the problem: the next harvest isn't coming for approximately another 2 months. So you have a gap: 30 days of food, almost 60 days until the next harvest. What happens in between? Because now you can't just tell people, don't worry, we will figure it out. You actually have to figure it out. When food is available everywhere, we don't really think about it. You buy it, you cook it, you eat it. Tomorrow you buy more. But when food becomes limited, everything changes. People start worrying. They start buying more than they need. Some start hiding food. Prices can go up. Rumors start spreading. And suddenly, you don't just have a food shortage. You have a panic problem. And that's when food stops being just food. It becomes power. Because whoever controls the food supply controls something even more valuable. That is time. If you have 30 days of food, you have 30 days to solve the problem. Your reserve isn't just food, it's time. And this is where the Arthashastra gets really interesting, because Kautilya doesn't treat food as some small household responsibility. The text describes a dedicated in charge of the storehouses, someone whose job involves managing the kingdom's stored supplies. What comes in, what goes out, what is stored, what is being processed, how much is available. Think about that. The king doesn't simply say, we have plenty of grain. There is a system that is supposed to know how much grain the kingdom actually has. Because if you don't know how much food you have, you don't have a food strategy. You have just a guess. And then we get to one of the most interesting ideas. The Arthashastra describes keeping half of the collected stores in reserve for calamities. The remaining portion can be used, and old stock is to be replaced with new stock. Think about that. Imagine your kingdom collects 100 units of grain. You don't look at it and say, great, we have 100. You think 50 can be used, 50 stays protected. That reserve is sitting there, doing apparently nothing until something goes wrong. And that's exactly why it exists. Because you don't know what's coming. Maybe the rains fell, maybe the crops are destroyed, Maybe a war cuts your supply routes, or a disease affects production, or maybe an enemy attacks your agricultural areas. You don't know. And that's the point. A reserve isn't there because you know a disaster is coming. It is there because you don't know. That's a completely different way of thinking about resources. You don't prepare because you know what will happen. You prepare because you know something eventually will happen. So, let's go back to your kingdom. You have 30 days of food, and you discover that next harvest is still 60 days away. Now every morning becomes a countdown. Day 30, 29, 28, 27. And as that number gets smaller, the pressure gets bigger and bigger. People start asking, how much food is left? Will there be enough? What happens to us if it runs out? And now the king has another problem. How do you distribute limited food fairly? Because if you give everyone the same amount, maybe that isn't actually fair. A soldier needs food, a farmer needs food, a worker needs food, and also an animal needs food. Different needs, different priorities, and every decision you make affects someone. This is where the Arthashastra doesn't give us one magical answer. It describes several possible responses during famine and scarcity, providing seeds and provisions, distributing food from the king's reserves, seeking assistance from friendly rulers, moving people toward places where food and water are available. And it also discusses undertaking useful works while supporting people through the crisis. So the idea isn't simply give everyone food and wait. The goal is keep people alive while trying to restore the system that produces food. That is much more strategic way of looking at a crisis. Because here is something we often forget. A kingdom doesn't need food only because people are hungry. It needs food because everything else depends on people eating. Soldiers need to eat, farmers need to eat, workers need to eat, officials need to eat. If people can't eat, the army doesn't function, farms don't function, economy doesn't function, the government itself doesn't function. Eventually, the kingdom doesn't function. So, food security isn't really just about food. It's about keeping the entire system alive. The Arthashastra goes into surprisingly practical details about the storehouse. Measurement, storage, processing, rationing, different quantities for different categories of people and animals. At first, these details sound boring, but think about why a ruler would care about them. Suppose your records say you received 100 sacks of grain, but after processing and distribution, the numbers quite don't add up. Where did the grain go? Maybe there was a waste. Maybe someone made a mistake. Maybe someone stole it. Whatever the reason, someone needs to notice. And that takes us back to something we discovered in episode 1. And that is information. In episode 1, your enemy knew your military plan. Only 5 people knew it. So the problem was, who leaked the information? We built layers, different sources, different people. Ways to verify what you were being told. Now, the problem is completely different. Your kingdom has food, but you need to know how much, where is it, how fast is it being consumed, how much can you safely use, and how long will it last. Different problem, but same principle. Build a system that gives you reliable information. Now forget the kingdom for a moment. Imagine you run a company. You have enough cash to survive for 30 days. That's your runway. Would you say, we have money, everything is fine? Probably not. You would start calculating. How much are we spending? Which expenses are essential? When is the next payment coming? What happens if the payment is delayed? What can we cut? Do we have a backup? Because 30 days of cash isn't really 30 days of comfort. It's 30 days of decision making time. And that's exactly what a reserves gives you. Time. This is why I find Arthashastra so fascinating. It isn't simply asking, how should a king behave? It's asking a much bigger question. How do you build a kingdom that can survive when things go wrong? That's different. Because anybody can look like a great ruler when everything is going perfectly. The real test is what happens when the harvest fails, treasury gets low, enemy attacks, or the food starts running out. That's when the system gets tested. So let's go back to the beginning. You opened your fridge. You imagined that's all the food you have for 30 days. Now imagine the fridge belongs to an entire kingdom. Thousands of people depend on it, and you are responsible for them. What would you do? Would you consume everything normally and hope more arrives? Or would you start thinking differently? How much do I actually have? How long will it last? What must I protect? What can I sacrifice? Where can I get more? And what happens if things get worse? Because a smart ruler doesn't only ask, how much do I have? They ask, how long can I survive if things go wrong? Those are two completely different questions. And maybe that's the biggest lesson. A reserve isn't wasted food. A reserve is stored time. You are buying yourself time to think, time to act, time to find another source, time to survive the unexpected. And that's why the ancient idea is still relevant. Because today, we may not be ruling kingdoms, but we still have emergency savings, inventory, cash reserves, backup system, contingency plans. The technology changed, the problem didn't. So, your spy problem is solved, your intelligence network is working, and now you have protected your food supply. You think the kingdom is finally safe, but then you look at the treasury, and there's another problem. Your food isn't the only thing running out, your money is. And now you have to answer a much more uncomfortable question. Who controls the king's treasury? That's our next story.